Hey HCDA, and today I have a guide for you on Motemancer that is going to be specifically aimed at trying to get through the early and mid game as fast as possible and as efficient as possible, with trying to avoid all of that rebuilding of your base that tends to happen if you play this game normally. Does that mean that this is the only way you can play this game? Definitely not, but I really did want to show this to you because it's a really fun and interesting twist on the normal approach. Now, first of all, as you can see, we're actually moving away from the starting position because I'm looking for these two patches over here. It's pretty much just due west of where you start out. If you skip the tutorial, you'll actually already start with these three technologies unlocked, which is a nice little speed boost if you already done that before, but it does mean that you don't really have any production yet, so you're still going to have to set that up. Clear out these mode fields and set up a little bit of ether and salt production to get yourself going, and then start making especially shifting slabs in order to, well, automate your factory, and of course you're going to need a little bit of all the other production materials as well. We're then going to use that to automate slabs. Just slabs, not everything else, because this is a very temporary facility. It's also, at least that's what I'm aiming for, the only temporary facility that we're going to need. But yeah, we do need to kickstart ourselves a little bit, so make sure we have the automated slabs will make everything else that comes after a lot easier. Because what we're going to be doing is setting up a horizontal production line for every single resource. And this is the first one. As you can see, I'm using the hex grid to my advantage to make sure I don't need to refuel this on more places than necessary. And there's a little box to collect the salt that I'm producing over here. But other than that, this is just a straight line up from the resources we have over here. Now, at some point this will run out and then we're going to replace this. So this is going to be our permanent factory. This is just as long as the resources last. We're going to do the same thing for both the ether and the prisms. And here's what that looks like. I have 4 of these grindstones making each base material, and I have 4, of course, then of these grippers to make sure that goes into a box. Now I can very easily grab a whole bunch of stuff from over here and then dump it in whatever box I need to make my stuff, and there you go. As you can see, I'm now producing quite a bit of these prisms, and it might look like a lot of handiwork, but honestly it is super fast, and not having to set up the whole infrastructure to connect everything up is actually really efficient. It's a major time saver. Now if you want to have a bit of a larger stockpile of resources, you can easily do something like this. You can do the same with, for example, adding in more boxes like this if you really want. And that way you can easily stockpile a whole lot of production by simply going through these boxes over here, collecting all these base resources, and then connecting that up to these boxes over here, and this will just keep filling the supply for this grindstone. Now, you might be wondering, is this not a whole lot of like babysitting your resource and things like that? The answer is yes, but in the long run, this is actually going to be efficient. It will just feel inefficient for the moment. Similarly, I'm not going to automate a lot of other things like, for example, slabs, at least not for the moment. I'm just going to set a little tinker table up here, connect some boxes to that, dump those boxes full of resources, and then the whole bunch of slabs will be spitting out really easily. And every time I pick up my slabs, I will just refill these boxes. It only takes a second, and then we're good to go once more. Same goes for the science. I can just dump a whole box full of these resources now, along with some salt, and as you can see now I can easily start my research once more, and we're going to go down this entire tree really quick. Keep in mind that this is only 100 of each item, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually super easy to produce at this point. Let's just check how much is already in this boxes. As you can see, I have 30 in these boxes already, and I just emptied them out. So this is really all the production that you need. And this is going to allow us to very easily scale up, do our tech, without having to fiddle around with a lot of this infrastructure. At this point, we can take out the temporary infrastructure that we had down here and just make it look a little bit prettier than it did before. And for example, do something like this where you kind of double up on the production. Now, you could worry about completely utilizing every single slot in this particular node. However, what I found is that these things will be running out anyway, so there's no real point in trying to min-max all of this stuff. You can if you want to, again, it's completely up to you, but there's really no need to do so. While this part of the technology tree is going to complete and make sure the mana flares are going to last 50% longer, we're then going to go down this tree to make sure we get the biorhythm going. I'm actually going to skip the mana blooms for a moment, but we need to get through those mana blooms anyway to get the biorhythm up and running. In order to keep everything efficient, we might as well collect the motes that we're going to need for those elementals from the belt we already have. And then, similar like before, set up a little bit of a production chain for this elemental lives. This time around, of course, we're going to need the elemental binders to do that. You'll have all the elemental life you need in a second to start the research, and honestly, you're probably already drowning in salt prisms at this point. Again, let me just double check my storage over here that I just emptied. This one has 20 in it, this one has almost 200 in it. Again, that is going to be plenty for everything we need to do for the foreseeable future. And while we're waiting for the live research to complete, we might as well start working on the water resource as well, because that will give us access to the streamways. And again, this just takes a minute to set up rather than trying to automate it all. Just setting this up and then running back and forth every minute or 5 or so is a lot less work and a lot more efficient than trying to automate everything from the get-go. Which is of course where the second pedestal comes in, so we can actually do that second research at the same time as well. And then the next thing we're going to do while we're waiting for this to be completed is bringing in some of the earth motes as well. Which is not really a challenge considering we have it right next door, which is why I picked this spot. And there we go, Earth research is on its way as well, which means I'm now researching 3 technologies at the same time, and I've only set up this part of my facility, which is super simple, along with some basic collectors. At this point, you'll probably notice that some parts of your facility are already at the standstill. So for example, this factory over here that is producing the slabs, I'm not actually using that many slabs because everything is so nice and tidy. So yeah, I'm sitting on 500 with, I don't know, another 500 or so in the bank. And that's all I need for the moment. As soon as you unlock Biorhythm, enable it, and this is probably the only thing we're going to be casting for a very long time. Now, every time you're kind of like babysitting your facility anyway, all you need to do is just run around a little bit. Whenever you're picking things up, you'll automatically be replenishing your flares. And remember, your flares already have 50% longer duration anyway. So while I am trying to kind of make sure my items go where they need to, I can very easily and kind of passively make sure everything gets charged up. And of course, every now and then, you might want to give some special attention to an item or two. In general, it should be very straightforward to make sure everything keeps working. At this point, you might be wondering, well, isn't this a lot of work to keep up with? And the answer is, well, yeah, kind of. It's doable, but you definitely want to start automating stuff around about this time. And that is where the Streamweaver is going to come in, because these streamways are going to make that a lot easier, and will also make sure that we will never have to redesign our base ever again. Okay, so here is the base idea. We have streamways available now, which means we can have 16 items per second on a single waterway, which also means that we can have 32 of these grindstone making base resources on a single streamway attached. Now, are we going to do that right away? Not necessarily, but we're going to go halfway. So we're going to make 16 grindstones on a single streamway. The main reason I'm not just scaling up to 32 straight away is because you simply don't need all that stuff from the get-go. And there's a second reason as well that might become more apparent later on. However, for the moment, 16 on every side. And I would recommend that you leave a little bit of space in between. 3 spaces to be exact. So if you want, you can place mana blooms in between here to power everything automatically, or you can just keep relying on the biorhythm to refuel it, because honestly it just takes a little bit of a trip around your factory to do that. Either way works, but this is the point where we're going to start scaling up. Which for starters is going to look like this. So you might notice that I don't have enough base resources coming in right now to actually utilize all of that, but that's the only problem we really have. Because these are 16 of these grindstones and making ether, and 16 of them making salt. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is start automating some of our production wherever we want, but in a way that we can easily readdress where our resources are going if we need to. And of course, then we're going to be adding some prism production to that in a very similar way, and we're going to have to connect these earlier resources up to do that. And this is why you want to wait until you have streamways, because these splitters actually make this a lot easier than doing it without. And then in a very similar way, we're going to be expanding that towards all these elementals, so you can make all the different types of elementals. Make sure you keep your belts clean and leave a lot of space for your expansions, because you're going to want to expand this later on. Initially, just keep it small. You only need a little bit of everything, so you can start working on that research. And again, as you can see, I am leaving about 3 spaces, or exactly 3 spaces, between the lower belts on one line and the upper belt on the other one. Again, that is because this will allow me to fit in the power later on. With all of these basics covered, we can now start to automate some of the other basics like grippers, slabs, and things like that. Now I am also starting to produce some leaves because I really want to optimize my life science as much as possible. We want mana leaves, which is basically infinite power, but we especially want to work towards the mana canopy, because once you have this, basically you never have power issues ever again. Also, at this point, you're going to run into some of these sciences that need several hundred items, and if you want to do that through a single altar, it's going to take forever. But if you have multiple altars all dedicated with the same types of resources, they do actually work in conjunction, as you can see happening here, which just speeds up the science progress as much as possible, assuming, of course, you actually have enough resources to put in. Speaking of science, you also want to start adding in the other types of elementals, and I like doing that on the same height as where I'm producing them. So you can see I'm producing the water elementals here, so I have the water elemental buildings over here, and then of course on top of this are going to be the earth elemental buildings, because that's where I'm producing the earth elements. Just keeps things more clean and nice and tidy by doing it like that. Oh, and for those of you wondering, why don't you automate all the power at this point? Well, as soon as you get the bioradiance going, this is a fairly easy life technology to get. You get a massive range on your biorhythm. And as you can see now, I just need to run through this little area of mine and look at all of that mana regenerating like that. Basically, as long as you just keep running around with your biorhythm enabled, because you're going to be expanding stuff, moving items between boxes anyway in order to start new types of research. I don't like automating my research actually, because that just leads to a lot of spaghetti. I just move up and down a few times with the required materials, and while doing that, all of this power is going to be recharged as I go past it, and now I have a massive range on this. It's super easy to keep everything automated, even without automating your power. The big exception to that is the power for your mote collection locations. So if you haven't done so yet, I highly recommend that you take a couple of these mana cultivators, hook them up to your mana blooms, and make sure that they power all your simple collectors or whatever you're using to grab your motes. Because you don't want to be running up and down towards these zones anytime soon anymore, because we have plenty of stuff to do in our main base. At this point, this is really just a matter of expanding your base depending on what you need. If you feel that some of your belts are getting pretty low, for example, my ether is pretty low in supply at the moment, then you might want to think about expanding that. Now, as you can see, I have all the different earth types of production up and running, and I am doing a lot of research, and every time I unlock something new, that is probably a building I want to add, so I can start producing that item in a building somewhere, and I can just redirect items where I want to go. So let's say, for example, I don't want my ether to go in the water production anymore because I need it somewhere else. I can just close that and make it flow to wherever it goes to, and then once I do need it back there, I can reconnect it, and that's that. Speaking of those base resources, it's very easy to just double up on all those base resources by putting in another 16 of these grindstones on the other side from where we started out. And again, this is why we picked a location with a massive amount of room to build, so we can keep everything nice and tidy. Now, you can actually make salt from both water as well as earth motes, so I'm using the earth version on this side. Keep in mind, though, that at some point you'll get a building that is called the brinery that actually makes salt from water more efficiently. So, of course, if you're using earth, that won't work, but either way, that works just fine for now. As you can see, I am doing a little bit of a twist and turn over here to make sure I'm using both sides of the waterway in order to optimize my production. So that is something to keep in mind if you're doing it like this. But other than that, as you can see, this is looking pretty nice and efficient. Another way to kind of like optimize the waterway, rather than building these two different resources on top of each other, is kind of like feeding it in from both sides of the waterway, the one from the top and one from the bottom. But I don't really like that, mostly for power concerns, so it's just another thing to consider, but this is why I'm doing it like this. Another thing to note about base resources is that at some point you will get access to collectors that are more efficient than the simple ones. So for example, motes of life can also be collected with the verdant collector, which outputs twice as many motes compared to a simple collector, which actually doesn't mean that it will draw out the motes twice as fast from the base collection over here. As you can see, it's just going down by 1 every time it mines, but it's actually outputting 2. So it's creating twice as many motes from this field compared to when you're using simple collectors. So this field will now last me twice as long as before if I would be using the simple collector. So make sure you use those. It will just make your life a lot easier, and make sure you don't have to replenish your inputs quite as often. Just keep in mind though that you can fit in a lot less of these things compared to how many of these simple collectors you will be able to fit in. So you actually do need more of them, but they will last twice as long. So it's worth the effort. Just keep that in mind once you set them up. I think you kind of get the gist by now, but we're not quite done because of course we haven't automated power yet, but I am working towards getting that mana cup going. Now, in the meanwhile, make sure that you optimize your buildings in whatever way you like, especially when it comes to automation. Now, what I like to do is just put a giant box in front of my buildings, so I can kind of make sure that I am not just dumping all of my leaves into production of, for example, these mana leaves over here. I just, every now and then, I just run past here, get all the stuff from this box, dump it in this box, and then whenever I need to redo that, it'll just be like once every 10 minutes or so at the most. And at some point, you don't really want some of these productions anymore, so this just avoids overproducing things you don't need. That is my preference. However, if you leave yourself enough space, you can easily just run an additional belt or something in between buildings like this, and then just transport things from A to B like that and completely automate that specific production if that is what you want to do. Alternatively, what you can do is just have that box in between your buildings and then have those things transported to the next building. So for example, I am producing the roots over here. Those are being put in this box. And that box is also feeding into the arboretum that is making the mana leaves and that uses those roots. You don't need to do this. Again, just play around with it and design it in whichever way you like. But I would try to limit the spaghetti to a minimum if you can, because look at how clean this all looks. Now, the real fun starts as soon as you unlock the magical mana canopy. This is a very strange building actually that amplifies leaves connected to it. So as it says, it generates bonus power per leaf connected. So the more mana canopies you have in your network, the more power each single leaf in that same network will be producing. And that doesn't just hold for the things that are like literally attached to the mana canopy, it uses every single leaf in the entire network. So this makes power kind of trivial to some extent because it only works during the day. But if you combine that with the technology over here, that is the mana pool that allows you to store power, then basically you can make it so that you're producing more power during the day and you can store that power up for use during the night when your mana leaves are not actually producing anything. You can make very beautiful layouts like this, and there's probably even better ones to make. I really like putting a mana pool in the middle, just kind of jumps out with all of these leaves around. But look at this. This is very simple to make. It is just like, I don't know, 50 or so, maybe not even that, mana leaves, along with about 12 of these mana canopies. And this is producing 12,000 power. Well, 11,000 is just going down now, but that's because the nighttime is coming. But this generates an insane amount of power, more than you're going to need for a very long time for your factory. And even if you need more power, well, you just make one of these layouts once more. And now we have that infinite power. We can utilize that power to completely automate everything we've built so far. And this is where things get really awesome. So you can of course use the mana blooms for that. This is why we left those 3 spaces in between every single production line, so it fits in nice and snug in between. And you should leave 3 spaces in between every single mana bloom in order to make sure you have perfect coverage between all of the mana blooms in both directions. Now, if you do that for your entire factory, as you can see, I've done exactly that over here. Everything will keep running pretty much until you're either filling all your boxes or you run out of resources somehow. But that's the only reason anything will stop producing in this factory anymore. As you can see, I am producing quite enough power even during the night. I have now 20,000 power stored up, which is actually not enough to come through the night because we're using more than we have available for the night, but that's a matter of just scaling up more mana pools. All that you need to do is that, but as you can see, this is now slowly transitioning from solar power to power from the mana pools, and it will keep running for quite a while. Another reason why it's very nice to have salt at the bottom of your production line is that's the first thing you might want to replace your production by a more advanced building with, and you have the room to expand and do that. So the brinery, like I said before, it makes twice as many salt from the same amount of motes. So between multiplying your motes by 2 by using the better collector for it, and then multiplying the salt production by 2 by using your brinery, that basically means you're getting 4 times as much salt out of your motes than you would normally. But yeah, anyway, as you can see, now we have a completely automated, very much optimized factory. There is a lot more research that you can do, I should say. However, you don't necessarily need to do all of this before moving on. You can just let this factory work for a very long time. And in the meanwhile, find one of those portals, you're actually quite close to one already, and move on to the next plane while this factory just keeps churning. And once you get back, you'll find yourself with boxes and boxes of materials, which will then allow you to complete much of the technology tree very, very quickly. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial on how to make a mega base. Of course, this is not quite an endgame base just yet. It's only going to allow you to complete about half of the technology tree, but the other half you will have to do by also traveling to different zones and realms. So, yeah. But you can pretty much just use this same approach on those realms as well. And by doing a lot of research on the life realm, you can bring along a lot of the stuff that you can then utilize on those next realms as well. Just make the progress that you do there a lot faster in return as well. Either way, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions to do this even better that others might also benefit from. Let me know if you have any other questions on the game or things you would like to see. And of course, if you found this useful, don't forget to like the video, it really helps, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Either way, if you're still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.